as I was thinking about the beginning of the year, what do I want my classroom to look like? I was fixated on this one question, and I could see students asking it with their backpacks on and all of their stuff still in their backpacks, sitting in their chair, which is, what are we going to do today? And this question truly drove me crazy because I felt like it reflected really badly on me, like how bad are my classroom routines that you don't know what to do, that you still have your backpack on. I don't understand. And also, like, what's with you? Like, what do you think is going to happen? We've been studying East Asian maps for 3 days. We're not suddenly going to switch and be a biology class. It's not going to happen. And so I really wanted to get rid of that question. Of course, it wasn't the question that was the problem. It was that I wanted my students to be thinking more carefully about what we had been doing, what we were likely to do the next day. And then I put that into a nice academic frame, which is I wanted students to be mobilizing prior course content as they went through their learning with me. And so I asked myself what kind of routines and procedures I could put in place to make that possible, and I came up with 3. I'm assuming that the 5 people here are the ones with the data. But in any case, those 4 routines were a TMTO, a 2-minute think over, which actually takes 10 minutes. It's a yellow sticky. Students write 3 takeaways, a question, and a prediction. We had the Did You Know, which is at the end of the week, where students would write what they discovered that week, and they had to take it home and have it signed after a conversation with family members. We had agenda annotations, which were to take place at the end of the unit. They would go back to their agendas and say, okay, what was the most important keys from this day, and then this day, and then this day. And finally, the concept card, which I wanted to be this beautiful thing that would engage visual and kinesthetic learners and have all this synthesis and that kind of thing. And so this research is the story of me trying those routines out and seeing how well they worked. So if you have it in front of you, you can look at it, and we'll start with concept cards, which you actually don't have in front of you because they totally didn't work. I wanted these beautiful things with images and with students making connections and synthesizing the whole unit, and I got a huge mess and shallow understanding. And so I said, okay, well, I'll try it again. I'm going to try it again. Well, tried to try it again, and I ran out of time, so I decided not to try it again. And then I pushed really, really hard to it in unit 3, and again, I pushed something out of the way and it was a huge mess and no depth of understanding. So I said, forget it, and I haven't done it since. But more successfully, the TMTO, the 2-minute think over. What I was hoping to find with it was that depth of thinking. I was hoping the questions and predictions would help me really understand what students were doing. I was hoping it would take them deeper, and I found that the takeaways were pretty much working. They were giving me the big ideas from the lesson. The predictions were mostly sensible, if inaccurate. We weren't actually going to do the stuff that they thought we were going to do. And the questions gave me a lot of information about how students were thinking about the topic. But I also noticed that they took a lot of time, and I didn't have anything to do with them. As I considered that routine, I didn't get far enough to say, what do I do with the TMTO once a student hands it in to me? And so that's okay. I tried it again. But I wasn't seeing students in round 2 connecting to prior course content. They were really good at saying, this is what we did today, this is my question about it, what I think we'll do tomorrow, but they weren't pulling it back to prior course content. And so what I did at the end of that round 2 is I took the takeaways and I scrapped the questions and the predictions. For those of you who want to see it, you can see it here from October and December. The 9th grade. The daily geography, the Did You Know? Is a weekly assignment where students write in the top and they have to have the bottom sign. My anticipation or my hope with that was that they would be having these deep thoughts, sharing them with people, making connections, really looking through the whole week's learning to find the most important piece of information. And what I found in round 1, and the sample here is from a student who said, this week in cultural geography, I discovered that Ms. Mosner likes Dr. Who. Which is, she's 14, and so this is wow, my teacher's in person, stuck with her or whatever, but that's not what I was hoping for. And so I did some direct instruction, what makes a good Did You Know? And they got a little bit better, but they still tended to be pretty shallow. So this week in cultural geography is round 2. I discovered that people consume different amounts of food each week. We had studied Hungry Planet, so around the world what people are eating. And that's much more on topic than the Dr. Who example, but it's still pretty weak. And so after round 2, I'm looking at this happening and I'm thinking, maybe this is not such a good data point. Maybe this is much better for communicating with students, for checking to see that they're completing their work. It's a weekly homework assignment, and so a student could come to me and say, how can I get my grade up? And I would look and I'd say, well, we have had 13 of these and you've done 2. And that was helpful, but maybe it's not going to be a data point for prior course content. So, okay, we're moving on, and then we get to the agenda annotations. The agenda annotations started students write down the agenda when they come into the room. As I write it down, that's the first thing that they do. I love it because there's nobody who says, what do I do? Everybody knows you take out your binder, you write the agenda down. That's how it goes. And then I had them going back, unit 1, 2, and 3, where they were going back at the end of the unit trying to remember it. And of course, they couldn't remember what happened that day. So I had agenda annotations that were like, I learned to understand thematic maps. And that's not what we learned that day, it's just what the headline and the agenda was and stuff. Like we practiced thematic maps if the headline was thematic maps practice. So that wasn't working. And so what I decided to do was to take the takeaway from the 2-minute makeover and swap that piece in for the agenda annotation. That became the takeaways that students are doing every day. Agenda at the beginning, lesson in the middle, takeaway at the end. I also swapped out my closing routine for that, so I'm checking each student. I can give them more guidance. It also makes a nice setup for dismissing students because it goes, okay, pack up, okay, pack up. This needs to be more detailed. And it's really a nice sort of routine thing. And so we're in, let's say, January right now, and I'm looking back at my routines and I'm saying, how are they going? Students are doing basically what I want in all 3, because I scrapped that 4th one. But in none of them am I really able to see prior course content. So I did some tweaks, and then I looked in some new places for information about whether students were connecting to prior course content. The new things I did were threefold. One was a piece of academic writing in Unit 5, where they were arguing for or against affirmative action. And what I was expecting was that stronger students would be showing more prior course content, but it was actually the opposite. The better the essay, the less prior course content was coming in, because they were synthesizing it and discussing the issues on the table. Worse papers pulled from prior units a lot more, because they were like, I don't really understand this thing, let me take this thing from Unit 4 that I understand, this true thing I understand, and plop it in. That was pretty fascinating to me. The small group conversations were like the most gratifying lesson that I did all year. It was in Unit 5. The Unit 5 question is really interesting. It's what is race? And I set students up in these small groups, and I gave them 13 questions. And they got in their groups, chose 2 of the questions, went out of their groups and wrote their ideas and then shared them and came up with points of unity. But the important thing there is that in those conversations was the first time I really saw students linking to prior course content without being like clumsy about it. I heard students actually say the words, no, you can't, because culture is a way of life shared by a group of people, like from Unit 1. I heard those words. I was like, and this is a particularly amazing group of boys. But it was just amazing how with those guided questions and with that open space to do that conversation, they were trying to make meaning by leaning on the information that they had prior. That was awesome. Very successful. And through that, I realized you can't always find links. You can't find in those little routines those amazing connections. Those happen in those sort of broader situations. I also started doing guided takeaways where I would tell students, give me your takeaway, and then I would list all the units we've done and tell me which one it connects to. And if you are looking at the data, you can see that on one day, I had students connect with Unit 2, Unit 4, Unit 3, Unit 5, and Unit 1. So they were making these connections all over the place when I was pushing them to do so. The big takeaways going forward have to do with, one, timing, like when is the right time in my course overall to be asking students to link to prior knowledge. Not even prior knowledge. I'm not talking about like what you know from your life. I'm talking about what we studied in Unit 1. It's not September 5th. Like that's not the day that they're going to look back on their prior course content and be like, oh, it's just like we learned on Tuesday. They can do that a little bit, but it's not meaningful. That comes later. That comes like after Unit 3 or 4. So that was a big takeaway for me. The other major takeaways for me also have to do with the benefits of the routine, but also how clunky those routines ended up being. Because I didn't think at the beginning of the year about how those routines would open up as the year progressed, I kind of just had to like wing it. When I was like, oh no, these routines are too constricting, I need to open them up. And they worked okay. They were trained up on the yellow sticky. They knew what to do when I put a yellow sticky in front of them. So when I pushed them to think more with it, they were able to do it. Same thing for the did you know. But it definitely makes me think that if I had been in August thinking more clearly about what I want, how I want my students to grow, I would also be thinking about how I want those routines to shift and open up as time goes on. And I think that's probably the main takeaway, and it's really interesting too, because as we start doing, and I've got two of my colleagues here, so as we start doing the vertical alignment between 9th and 12th, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, what does that opening up look like? A 9th grader in September should not be the same as a 9th grader in June, same thing with a 10th or 11th grader. So figuring out how these structures and routines that we're trying to adopt can open for students, as opposed to just being like, this is how we do it, and now you're a 12th grader and we want like sentence starters for your topic sentence. Obviously that's not functional. And it stinks because I just ended on a sour note about 12th graders wanting sentence starters. Ultimately, this was a really great look into how the routines that I had come up with ultimately helped me get what I wanted, but I had to wait for it. Not just because I had to wait to see, but because they weren't ready for it until about halfway through the year.